Recently, I've covered builds to help you solo any dungeon for Warlocks and Titans. Well, today it's time for Hunters to get their turn. So grab a cup of coffee and a notepad and get ready to learn how to put together a Hunter build that can easily solo any dungeon. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When it comes to soloing a dungeon, there are three things that you need to think about. Number one, do you have the ad clearing potential to make it to the damage phase? Number two, do you have the survivability to last in both the damage phase and the ad clearing phase? And number three, can you deal enough damage to not have to go through extra damage phases? Well, when it comes to ad clearing, Prismatic Hunter can shred through enemies like no other. With class exotics offering perks like Spirit of Caliban for ignitions and abilities that allow you to infinitely cycle between themselves, you can mass delete enemies. And don't worry, if you don't have a role with Caliban, I've got you covered. The second portion we need to address is the survivability. With Prismatic Hunter giving you access to Vanishing Step, you can consistently go invisible while ad clearing. And if you're really struggling to stay alive in the boss phase, you can swap to Golden Gun as your super and gain access to Restoration. And finally, for the third part about dealing enough damage, we'll have access to Radiant and Weapon Surges, giving us maximum damage with our weapons. But I also like to bring Tether to maximize our damage potential with a 30% debuff. So when it comes to the exotic, a class exotic is the best option. In the left column, I'd probably take Caliban or Inmost Light, and in the right column, I'd go with synthoceps, Crackney, or Spirit of the Liar. And if you don't have any of these roles, you can just use Celestial Nighthawk and swap over to that Golden Gun super. Before we get into the build, I have one question for you. Have you been experiencing lag and dropped frames playing games on your console? Well, I'm super excited to announce I'm partnering with Apex Gaming PCs. My PC lineup has a PC for everyone. With Destiny being a 10-year-old franchise, even the most entry-level PC can handle running it. These PCs are powered by AMD CPUs for multitasking, so you can run Destiny 2 and all of your favorite Destiny apps at the same time. And you can even finance it so that you can afford to buy Destiny's 6 years of content. From now until September 30th, you can use code WeLoveOurPartners for 20% off. With that being said, let's jump right back into the video. So when it comes to the super, I love to bring Tether. That way I can stack with Radiant and Weapon Surges to allow my weapons to deal the most amount of damage possible. If you are struggling with survivability, you can swap over to Golden Gun. That way you can proc Restoration more often, but we will touch on how you do that in a minute. As for the abilities, for my class ability, I'm taking Gambler's Dodge so that I can use my dodge near enemies to gain back my melee ability. This is really helpful to cycle through your abilities in the ad clearing portions. And as for that melee, technically Combination Blow is one of the best options for ad clear. Though personally, I like Threaded Spike. Not only do you get back a ton of ability energy by hitting multiple targets, but this also makes it so that you can sever a target at range. Remember, sever is a debuff that makes an enemy deal 40% less damage. So now while in a DPS phase, you can throw that powered melee for a bit of extra damage and make it so that you take 40% less damage from that boss. And when it comes to the grenade, it's more of a personal preference. For straight up damage, I'd go with Swarm Grenade, but since I'm using Threaded Spike, I like to bring Grapple. I can create tangles more often with Threaded Spike, and then I can use those tangles to get a free grapple melee. Plus, this means it's a bit safer in those transition phases. As for the aspects, the first aspect we're taking is Stylish Executioner. This is the clear best aspect because now whenever we kill a debuff target, we go invisible, which is absolutely massive when solo. Both your melee and your grenade will debuff a target, allowing you to go invisible, but you can also use a weapon with Incandescent to make it even easier to go invisible more often. And this is another reason why I like to take Grapple as the grenade. When you melee from invisibility, you not only weaken the target, but you also deal 200% more damage, which is really nice for mini bosses, especially when you're using synthoceps on your class exotic. For your second aspect, personally, I like Threaded Specter, but depending on your playstyle, I can see the argument for Winter Shroud or Gunpowder Gamble. I like to use Threaded Specter so that I can create a decoy by dodging when I'm in that DPS phase. That way, I can get a little bit of extra time to just straight up deal damage and not have to worry about staying alive. But Winter Shroud and Gunpowder Gamble can be better for the ad clearing portion, so use whichever one fits your playstyle best. And when it comes to the fragments, the first fragment I'm taking is Facet of Protection, so that now when you're surrounded, you take 15% less damage, which is really nice if you're running something like Synthoceps, and when you're using your grapple melee. Then I take Facet of Purpose, so that when I pick up an orb, we get a buff based on what super we're using. With Tether, we get a Void Overshield. And this is why I say if you're struggling with survivability, to swap over to Golden Gun. That way you can use orbs to gain restoration and have that constant healing. Then I bring one of my favorite combinations, Facet of Honor and Facet of Awakening. Now, picking up or destroying an elemental pickup like Tangles and Fire Sprites, you'll get Transcendent energy based on the elemental pickup. And this pairs perfectly with Facet of Awakening, so that rapid kills create elemental pickups based on the damage source. This leads to going Transcendent more often for more survival and a more guaranteed way to have Transcendence for your DPS phase. And finally, I bring Facet of Balance, so that rapid light-based kills give melee energy and rapid darkness-based kills give grenade energy. But if you are in a season that doesn't have access to easily proc Radiant, then I'd swap this one out for Facet of Dawn. Hey you! Yeah, you. Are you enjoying the video? If so, remember to leave a like on the video and consider hitting that subscribe button. So what does this look like in action? Well, you can use your melee and grapple as much as you like to clear out enemies. In the meantime, you'll consistently go invisible. If you need a quick way to stay alive and gain that extra survivability, you can use your weapons to also proc invisibility, and I also like to bring one of those weapons with heal clip to gain that burst of health. And when going into a DPS phase, you want to make sure to have your super and transcendence ready. Right as the damage phase is about to start, pop that Transcendence, and then pop your Tether. After that, start going to town on the boss. I like to consistently throw my grenade and use my melee while Transcendent. That way I can help cycle between them, adding in extra damage and severing the boss. When getting low on health, dodge to create a decoy and gain that extra safety. And on really tough bosses, you can bring weapons like Dragon's Breath, so that while your rocket's dealing that damage over time, you can shoot a mini target and proc that heal clip weapon and keep gaining health and potentially going invisible in the process. So let's talk about ways to improve the build. First up, for our stats, I like to aim for 100 resilience as my #1 option to gain that extra 30% damage resistance. Then I aim for about 100 discipline and about 70 recovery, so that we can use our grapple a ton and our health will come back quicker while invisible. When it comes to the armor mods, first up for the helmet, I'm taking Solar Siphon. That way I can use my solar primary weapon to create orbs by getting rapid kills and consistently gain that Void Overshield or Restoration if you're on Golden Gun. I then bring Hands On so that we can use our powered melee and our grapple melee to gain extra super energy, meaning that we should have our Tether ready to go for every single DPS phase. As for the gauntlets, I take Heavy-Handed and Firepower so that our powered melee will create an orb, and if Heavy-Handed isn't on cooldown, then you can create 2 orbs from your grapple melee. That way you can ensure you have the maximum uptime on your weapon surge and gain that extra survivability from the Void Overshield from Facet of Purpose. As for the chest mods, most dungeons will require you to run 3 resistance mods when you're running solo. I like to match these to the enemies that I'm facing in the encounter. So typically I run 2 elemental resistance with either melee resistance or concussive dampener, again depending on the boss. Make sure to match at least one of these elemental resistance to the damage type of the boss so that you can survive a bit longer in those DPS phases. And for the leg mods, since we are solo and the only ones dealing damage, I run 3 weapon surges to get the most amount of damage possible. I typically like to run Dragon's Breath. I take 2 solar weapon surges to buff my heavy weapon, and then 1 strand or stasis weapon surge to match my backup DPS weapon. If you're running another heavy like Whisper of the Worm, then I just run 3 weapon surges that match your heavy. And for the class mods, I take Bomber for that extra 12% grenade energy whenever we dodge. I then like to take Time Dilation so that now we can hold up to a maximum of 45 seconds for our armor charge, which will make it easier to have your weapon surge active throughout the entirety of a DPS phase. And then I also take Powerful Attraction so that now we collect any nearby orbs just by using our class ability. As for the artifact mods, this build will outlast this season. However, there are a few artifact mods that help this build out even more. I first like to take Radiant Orbs for that extra 25% weapon damage just by picking up an orb, which we should be constantly creating. Then you can take Solar Fulmination so that the ignitions you cause from Dragon's Breath or Spirit of the Caliban will deal extra damage. Then I take Shield Crush to deal even more damage and increase the recharge rate of our grenade. And if you plan on using a sniper like Whisper of the Worm, you can bring Sniper's Meditation and Incendiary Sniper rounds to deal even more damage. You can also bring an auto rifle as that primary weapon with heal clip, and then you can use Sustained Fire and Targeting Autoloader to gain more damage resistance and damage just by using your auto rifle. And when it comes to weapons, since this build is for any dungeon, You should be using weapons that match the boss that you're facing, though I do have 2 loadouts that I really like. The first loadout is for those non-precision based bosses. In the primary, I bring Scatter Signal with Overflow and Controlled Burst for that good secondary DPS option. For the energy slot, I bring a Solar Primary with Heal Clip and Incandescent. Heal Clip will constantly give you more health, and Incandescent will help you proc invisibility more often. For that heavy slot, I bring Dragon's Breath. This rocket has to be one of the best damage per shot ratios and is pretty good DPS as well. And because it deals that damage over time, you can shoot a rocket to either hide for a bit or kill some regular enemies and proc that heal clip in those really tough DPS phases. The second loadout I have is for bosses that have an easy to hit crit. I again bring a heavy hitting special weapon. Something like Scatter Signal or Naeem's Lance can be used to take down mini bosses or targets further away. I again bring a Solar Primary weapon with Heal Clip and Incandescent for the added survivability. And for that heavy slot, I bring Whisper of the Worm. This option is a little bit more on the dangerous side, so just make sure to play your life and don't get greedy. Hunters have one of the most fun builds around, giving you a ton of damage, survivability, and even traversal with grapple. But remember, mastering this build is only the beginning. Experiment with different combinations and tweak your loadout to suit your playstyle. If you found this video helpful or just enjoyed seeing a new perspective, feel free to like the video and comment down below on what you might change or how you'd improve the Hunter version of the solo dungeon build. Keep an eye out for future videos as we continue to explore the ever-evolving world of Destiny 2. Until then, may the threads of fate be ever in your favor. This is Lucky Mech signing off. See you on the next adventure, Guardians.